And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes, brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud sponsor of the Bonds, Loans and ESG Africa 2025 conference from the 25th to the 26th of March at the Cape Town International Convention Centre. Good evening. Welcome to The Money Show tonight. I'm Stephen Grootes. Good to have you along with us. Fascinated by what's going on at Stadio Holdings. They're a really private tertiary educational institution. And if you think about the maths of the number of people who come out of university and are desperate for a place to go and study, to get a qualification after matric, you would think that groups like that are doing very well. Well, in this case, they are. And it would make sense that this is something to invest in. Of course, what you really want after that is jobs for the young people to get these qualifications. But that kind of isn't really the job of Stadio, is it? I was interested, though, if you go through some of their SEND statement today, and we'll speak to their CEO in a little while, is that they're looking at an 80%, 20% split. 80% of their learners will be distance education. So I presume in the main, learning at home virtually, studying at home virtually, perhaps I should say. And I'm one of the people who grew up in what I suppose you would call what now looks like the old-fashioned era, where you went to a place to study. And that worked for me, I think. And as a result of that, that's kind of what I would want for my children. And yet, if you look at the numbers, the sheer metrics, the cost of education, there's just no way that that's going to be the mainstream way in which this is done. I do wonder which option you would prefer for your child, though. If money was no object, if money didn't matter, if you could afford it either way, would you want your child, let's put it another way, if you live a walk away from an educational institution and your child, maybe they're 18, 19, 21, 22, and they're studying a course and they could go into the institution or get the same course online, which would you choose? What would you do? And I can't help but feel that I would encourage my children to go into the institution. I must also just say, if I was one of the people doing the teaching, would I actually want to look at a screen or would I want to look at people? I think I'd want to look at people. Call me old-fashioned if you like, but whenever I'm on a Zoom conversation, it's never the same as actually being in a face-to-face meeting. And I can't help but wonder if we're going to start seeing this. And in a way, it's maybe still too early to know how effective it is. And actually, it's going to take quite a long time. Anthony Leeming, the CEO of Sun International, we spoke to him last week. Now he's the outgoing CEO of Sun International, taking early retirement. We'll ask him why in just a few moments. I think there's some interesting questions to ask him about the future direction of the group, as well as if you look at who's coming in to take over. And then Jonathan Oppenheimer, of course, founder of the Oppenheimer's SA Future Trust, on the future of small businesses. We'll speak to him and Matthew Marsden about what they're doing for small business in about half an hour from now. Don't forget, though, Mike Teke, we'll speak to him. He is the CEO at Seriti Mines, and also chair of the Masimong Group, but also just a fascinating journey from where he was born to where he is now. One of those sort of inspirational South African stories. I met him once at a dinner. We actually ended up sitting next to each other at a dinner a long time ago now. We had quite a good chat. Very interesting guy to listen to talk to. If you're going to sit next to anyone at a dinner, you get a chance to sit next to him, maybe take that chance. But I found that very interesting. There are so many interesting stories in South Africa, and his life story is certainly one of them. Be good to hear from you tonight. Where would you like your children to study? If it were up to you, would it be face-to-face? Would you be sending them off to the institution, or are you happy for them to sit in their room on a screen? 011 8830 702 021 446 0567. Voice notes tonight as well on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, confirmation this morning from the Sun International Group. Its CEO, Anthony Leeming, now taking early retirement. He's been at the group actually since before the turn of the millennium. 1991, he led it during the pandemic as well. The group announcing today that Ulrich Bengtson will be the new CEO. He has a strong history in the gaming and gambling industry in the UK. Well, Anthony Leeming joins us now. Anthony, good evening. It feels like just last week we were speaking to you, because it was. You've been running the group for nearly 9 years. You have a long history with the group. Is there any particular reason you've decided to retire a little early?
Good evening, Stephen. Good evening to your listeners. No particular reason. I've been there, as you say, for 26 years and led the group for 8 years through quite a difficult period. And I've always, been speaking to the board for a while about when my planned exit was. And I think I'm young enough to sort of do some different things going forward. Nothing on the radar yet, and I feel it's a good time to step down and hand over the reins.
I mean, people sometimes talk about a sort of third career, setting up foundations, doing something else with their life. Is that where you're headed, or are you looking for another business opportunity of some kind?
At this stage, I'm going to just take a bit of time off and make up my mind during that period. So no plans at this stage to get involved in anything just yet. But certainly, I think in the not too distant future, I will start looking and do a few things.
25 years, a long time to be with one company. Sun International has changed quite a lot over that time, and particularly during the pandemic.
Yeah, it changed significantly. I think just before I took over, we had a lot of debt. You just opened Times Square and we had all the LATAM operations and spent a lot of time getting all that right. And then straight after the balance sheet was strengthened and everything was looking quite good, we entered the pandemic and had to make a lot of real tough decisions, close some operations, set off the LATAM operations, and refocus the group. And that was a particularly tough time, obviously being closed for 3 months and then further closed down periods thereafter. So a very tough time for the group and a very stressful period. But ultimately, I think Sun came to it very strongly, had to refocus and really focus on the online because of all the changes and the changing gaming dynamics. And I think we've been quite successful in pivoting and using our portfolio to be successful in the online space.
I mean, the main thing perhaps was speed, because the world changed fundamentally. You needed to have an attractive online operation. Otherwise, market share was just going to go.
That's exactly right. I think, having to get the market right, land-based casinos have certainly faced a tough time since the pandemic. And I think we still have very good properties, and our large properties still doing quite well. But ultimately, the growth's come in the online space, and we've had to make sure we're well positioned to grow there.
As I understand it, you're still in your position until the end of the year. Ulrich Bengtson will start in July. Or did I read that correctly? Whenever they get the work permit sorted out. Are you going to be working together for those 6 months? Is that the idea, a sort of transition period?
He will take over the role as CEO on 1 July or earlier if the work permit comes through. But certainly I'm around still to assist where needed and certainly make sure the handover is as seamless as possible and just be there for any support that he may need.
At the moment, Sun International is sort of, I think most people know the name Sun International because of one of your particular resorts that they think about. And it's a sort of resort hotel group and gaming and gambling. Bengtson has a strong history in the gaming industry in the UK. Is that an indication of which direction the group's going to go? SunBet's going to be more and more important going forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you look at the group and our sort of where we come from, we are a resort and gaming group. Most of our revenue right now, 60% of our income and EBITDA is from urban casinos, and we have the LPMs. And then the hotels and resorts, which are actually a smaller part of the business, but it is sort of almost the heart of Sun International. It's part of our fabric. And I think with the growth in the online space, it's kind of a different skill, and we're fortunate enough to have got a few good people, and we believe that is the way to push the growth. Not to say we're going to neglect our sort of urban casinos or our hotels and resorts, which are still very important to the portfolio. And I think that's also helped us position, because of that strength in the brand, and Sun City has helped SunBet grow. So I think leveraging off what we have has been part of our success in the online space. And that's definitely having someone with much more online background will help us grow that business quite significantly.
At the moment, online gambling is exploding. It's kind of at that phase. I don't know how much longer it can continue to grow at this rate for. There must be a ceiling somewhere, obviously still some distance away.
Yeah, I think growth's got to slow. There's no doubt about that. But I think with our brand and with Sun International's position, the focus will be on actually gaining market share. And we're definitely growing faster than the market over the last 2 years. But we're still a relatively small player. And I think with our brand and our property portfolio, we have a good foundation to make sure we make some gains in market share. Even without the sort of online gaming maybe growing at the pace that's growing currently. And that will be the focus.
It's been a big part of your life, Anthony, from 1999. You're going to miss it?
Absolutely. It's an amazing company, but amazing experience with. They made some great friends, and to be given the opportunity to have run the business has been the highlights of my career. And I think almost half my life has been there. So it's all I know really in the business world. And it's been an unbelievable experience. So look back with absolute fondness. And it was quite an emotional day today, talking to staff and to my senior team But ultimately, I think better things ahead, different things, and very excited about the future.
Anthony Leeming, thanks very much indeed. Thanks for agreeing to talk to us. Outgoing CEO, I suppose I should say, at the Sun International Group.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
The Stadio Group announcing its headline earnings per share up 26% for the year to the end of December. Its student numbers up quite strongly as well. The company is saying it is now focusing on distance learning, and you can imagine the number of people who finish matric desperate for a post-school qualification, don't get a place at a university, maybe don't want to go to a TVET college for whatever reason, so you can see the market that is there. Chris Forster is the CEO at Stadio. Chris, good evening to you. Strong growth in your student numbers. Where are these students coming from? Are they the kind of people I've just described? Someone who maybe wants a university degree, comes to you for a qualification?
Yes, good evening, Stephen, and thank you for the opportunity. Yes, I think 24 was another good year for Stadio. We managed to produce a strong set of financial results again. And as you've indicated, we've seen good growth coming especially from distance learning, as well as we're seeing some nice green shoots in our contact learning business. The majority of our students still in the distance learning space, 87% of our total student numbers are in the distance learning space, and then the remaining 17% then in the contact learning.
I presume there's a price difference in the courses that you offer online, distance learning, and the courses that you offer face-to-face?
Yes, definitely so. Due to the bricks and mortar of running a big campus, contact learning campus, that comes with cost, a maintenance cost, etc. And then the distance learning offering is especially there to ensure that we have an affordable alternative for students who cannot afford the higher price point at the contact learning campus.
Do you find any difference between the results of those students who study virtually or study distance online and those who actually come into the campuses? I mean, I presume there's some courses where you can compare quite directly what the results are like.
Yeah, so unfortunately one cannot offer all your programs. For example, engineering, we currently do not offer or don't have the option of doing it online. But the other programs, I think we have managed over the years to really focus on our student support. And there's actually a very small difference in throughput and pass rates when you compare graduates coming from contact learning and distance learning. We've managed over the last 4 years to increase our pass rates in the distance learning space from low 60%, very close to the 70% mark.
What changes did you make? I mean, I presume the online offering that you have now is slightly different from where you were 4 years ago, and clearly something's changed to get that improvement.
Yes, most definitely so. The online access that students have, making data available to students, give us the opportunity to have more frequent contact with learners, and then also to supporting them with their study material and where they get stuck when studying, using the distance learning mode.
You mentioned engineering. You want to offer more of those qualifications. Are you seeing a big demand for them?
Yes, most definitely. Stephen, last year we started with our School of Architecture, and we were actually flooded this year at our campus here in Bellville. And therefore, we're very excited about the prospects of our new Durbanville campus, where we will have much more space and where we will be in a position to accommodate more students for those programs, for example, IT, engineering, and architecture.
I mean, you say you can't offer that virtually yet. I presume that is the plan. What do you still need to do to actually be able to do that? And engineering kind of does sound hands-on to me. I mean, I say that having never studied engineering myself.
Yeah, so I think our big challenge there is to get an alternative for the laboratory work that students need to do and show their competence. and it's very much a feel offering that the students must touch and feel the equipment that they work with in these labs, and I think that would remain the challenge. But technology is really taking leaps forward in this regard, and I believe in future this will really become a possibility.
It's interesting to see how, and I'm sure you have some research on this I don't know if you do, on how your qualifications are seen compared to sort of the more traditional degree from an older institution, say, for example, the Wits University or University of Northwest or one of those. Do you have any idea of how your qualification is seen, say, in architecture compared to others? Architecture may be a bit early, but I would presume it depends on who's doing the teaching, what the throughput rate is, all sorts of other questions, and it can take time to build a reputation as well.
Yes. What we do is we do graduate employability surveys where we actually do research on the employability of our graduates. That is for us a very good indication of our standing in industry. And we are very proud with our graduation surveys that we have done, seeing that our graduates are actually very much sought after in industry. From day one, that was something that we focused on, inviting industry into our business, right from where we start with the curriculum development of a new program, inviting industry into the classroom, and then also in the evaluation of the program afterwards and getting feedback on how our graduates are actually performing in the workplace. And all of these things contribute to our graduates being sought after, and employability levels really, really looking very good in comparison with your typical public universities.
I presume the outlook is that there will just be more demand for your services. There will possibly be more competition against you as well at some point.
Yes, most definitely. I think if you look at the private higher education space over the last few years, there are quite a number of new institutions moving into the space.
Chris Foster, thank you, CEO at Stadio Holdings. Do appreciate the time. Question open to you tonight, of course. How would you prefer your child, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, whatever, to study? Would you want to send them off to the institution? Would you be happy for them to study on a screen at home? 011 8830702 021 446 0567.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Sia Mbata is an investment analyst at Old Mutual Investment Group. Sia, good evening. Good to have you again on The Money Show. Nice strong update from the Premier Group, and the market loved it.
Good evening, Stephen. Yes, for sure. Premier up 7%. So what was quite interesting with Premier, for those that are maybe not aware, Premier owns the brand Snowflake, which produces baking powder as well as premixes, and particularly blue ribbon bread, so that is done really well. And with the trading update, they expect headline earnings to increase about 20 to 30% for the full year, which is quite substantial. What I like about the business is that it's well diversified across the consumer basket. They've got market-leading positions in a number of categories. And what's really interesting is that in the last period where soft commodity input costs have increased about 7 to 10%, which is significantly ahead of inflation, the business has managed to hang on to their margins, which is resounding, and they've managed to demonstrate discipline within CapEx investments as well as pricing. So they've done really well.
It's going to be interesting to see how that share price does, and we'll wait for the full year announcements. Raubex, they say the full year headline earnings might be as much as 25% higher. Nice to see a group that's involved in construction in some way, shape or form doing well.
Yes, Stephen, most certainly. Raubex up 4%. So this is a stock we've actually liked for quite some time now, and it's done well for us. And it's one of the few construction companies that have actually survived post-2010. Typically, management have handled the balance sheet quite well. They've been quite conservative, and that's really worked out for them. They've actually managed to diversify the business away from Sanral, into infrastructure and mining, and this has really done well for them. So this is really great. We've seen construction recover, and because they are one of the remaining few companies with the balance sheet to support the projects, they've benefited quite significantly from that point of view. I think the caveat here going forward is that although they've done really well, one of the acquisitions that they made a few years ago, the Barber acquisitions, actually led to them gearing up the balance sheet quite well. So the Barber acquisition is quite great for their revenue, but from a cash flow perspective, it had significant working capital requirements and still needs to break even from a cash flow perspective. And so I think investors might be a bit wary going forward with where chrome prices are. So we need to keep an eye on where chrome prices are going forward, as well as mining projects.
It's interesting just to watch because, I mean, you don't want to be too dependent on really anything to do with government, I suppose, and over-dependence on Sanral in the longer term was going to be problematic. And I don't mean to say anything against Sanral, it's just you want more than one customer.
Most certainly, and we've seen them with the acquisitions within mining. They've actually even gone into infrastructure as well, so they've seen phenomenal growth within renewable projects.
In the situation with Goldfields, they wanted to take full control of the Gruyere gold mine in Western Australia. That was rejected, and along with some other gold shares, they were down today.
Yeah, I mean, gold stocks have been particularly weak today, more so Goldfields, off the back of the news, so down about 5%. And the cash offer was rejected. What's interesting about the acquisition is that the proposed acquisition was that they already had a 50% stake in Gruyere. And Gruyere is an interesting mine because it's in Western Australia, it's low cost, it's long life. But at this particular point in time where gold prices are so elevated, I think investors are a bit nervous. For one, management haven't previously indicated that they'd be looking at doing any M&A. They've historically felt that they could get more value from junior miners where they can get access to early stage projects. So it was a bit surprising that they'd be looking at an acquisition at this point in time. And if you look at the price that has been proposed, it's at a significant premium to the market value. And however you slice or dice it, you're at the top of the cycle with elevated gold prices, and there's a risk that you're actually overpaying for these assets. And historically, this has been a bugbear with investors, specifically speaking to gold companies, where you're overpaying, spending significant amounts of capex at the top of the cycle. Thank
you very much indeed, Sierra Mbata, investment analyst at the Old Mutual Investment Group, bringing the Time on the Money Show to 6:30.
7:02. Stephen is on the Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, good to hear from you tonight. You know the number, of course, on 011 8830702 and 021 446 0567. The South African Future Trust, run by the Oppenheimer family, and the Startup Club and the Startup Club SA are starting to prepare for the Big Pitch 2025. The winner receives $1 million to invest in your business. That's not rands. The finals will also be held at the SA Future Trust Summit. That's at the end of October at the Sandton Convention Centre. Well, the chair of the South African Future Trust is Jonathan Oppenheimer. Matthew Marsden is the head of the Startup Club SA. They both join us. Now, gentlemen, good evening to you, and thank you very much indeed for your time. Jonathan, if I may start with you, the overall aim of this is to help smaller firms. It fits in with a big part of your overall agenda of trying to stimulate our economy.
100%, Stephen, and it's great to talk to you again. I mean, the South Africa Future Trust and what it's doing, trying to support small business in South Africa, I'm incredibly proud of it. And fundamentally, the world knows that small business is the petrol that goes into the engine that drives the car. So we need to find a way to enable this. And there are so many small businesses out there that have these great ideas, and yet they run into roadblocks everywhere they turn. And our job, at least what we're trying to make our job, is finding ways to, one, help them navigate around the roadblocks. And if they can't navigate around the roadblocks, how do we get rid of those roadblocks?
Michael, how does this competition work? I mean, how do you manage the entries, all the technicalities? How does that work?
Yes, Stephen, thank you very much. And of course, a privilege to be on the call with Jonathan. So as Startup Club, we've done a similar initiative for years prior. And really, it's all about trying to uncover disruptive startups. And I use the definition startup quite explicitly. We inherit the global Silicon Valley definition there. These aren't necessarily just side hustles or starting outs. These are companies that are looking to solve problems, typically with innovation and technology. It's this beautiful intersection of innovation and entrepreneurship, and also speaks to the breadth of the focus that the SAF team brings to the table in terms of growing the broader entrepreneurial sector. We have got two wonderful qualifiers happening over the next 6 months, one in Johannesburg and one in Cape Town. And if folks meet the respective application criteria, we encourage them to apply for what is an unprecedented opportunity, not only in South Africa, but more broadly in Africa too.
And Jonathan, I mean, it can be quite tricky to work out which ideas will work, which won't. I mean, I sometimes sort of watch these things develop, and I watch businesses develop, and I'm like, I didn't see that idea would be successful, but there it is. Or I thought this idea would be hugely successful, but actually the market wasn't quite there. And I mean, this is the essence of entrepreneurship, isn't it?
Yeah, I think between Matt and ourselves at the South Africa Future Trust, we've got to somehow try separate those who've got great ideas but don't have the capacity to deliver from those who have great ideas and have the capacity to deliver. And, I'm blessed in working with some of the smartest people around the world. And it's just great to get those minds in the room to start a conversation and watch people fire off each other. And as they fire off each other, you can just see ideas which were nascent at the beginning begin to grow flesh on those bones. And it's truly amazing. I mean, we did something similar at the last South Africa Future Trust, which awarded likewise a big grant at the end of last year. We're really, really excited about this program this year. And we just wanted to build and build and build. We would love for this to become the forum for anyone who really wants to be recognized as the best of the best in the startup space, or in the smaller business space, let's call it that, in South Africa, frankly, in Africa. And we believe we've got all the building blocks to build that. We just now need to build the house.
And Michael, I mean, the big finale, end of the year, Sandton Convention Center, a lot at stake for these companies when we get there. I mean, $1 million, 20 million rand. I mean, that's a ton of money. That really will, make a company successful, I would think. It'll be the big breakthrough that they would need.
Yes, Stephen, it's unprecedented. To be frank, normally companies would pitch for the exposure alone. And of course, through the generosity of the South African Future Trust, we make an opportunity like this possible. But yeah, we are looking for the best of the best, the next big game changer and innovator. Of course, we build up over the next 6 months in doing that. And just to speak to your question earlier, we have these two qualifiers, the most imminent of which is coming up in Johannesburg on the 23rd of April. And if there are entrepreneurs on the call here today, and they think they have an idea that might change the world or become a big business, we want to hear from them. They're welcome to apply. Those applications close on the 8th of April. And we will take the best 10 to pitch on stage in front of the biggest live audience that's certainly been assembled in the city before for an event of this kind, before advancing them to what will be the grand finale in Sandton at this year's South African Future Trust. So all incredibly exciting. But to your point, this is an unprecedented opportunity, and especially in an environment where early stage risk capital, typically this gap would need to be filled by folks in venture capital or angel investors. To have this sort of quantum of capital available, it's potentially going to move the needle in an astronomical way.
It's quite something, and I'm sure there'll be more and more interest as the competition continues. Jonathan, I mean, we've spoken to you before about how you've been helping South African businesses, smaller businesses, pretty consistently through these programs. I know government says that it is trying to do the same thing. I know from time to time, I must say to me, it doesn't always look like like government is really doing that. Do you see evidence that government is sort of serious about what it says it's supposed to be doing? I sometimes look at the Small Business Development Ministry, and I've asked so many people who run small businesses and small business organizations on this program, does that ministry make any difference? And I'm afraid to say I've come away from all of that a little bit cynical.
Well, I mean, there was an article this morning on News 24, which was talking about a small consultancy firm that is owed something like 12 million rand by government and has started a layoff process for some of its 50 employees because government can't pay on time. And in my mind, I think that government needs to look to its own house to figure out how it can help business. And it's not great at doing that. It's a poor payer. Frankly, all big business in South Africa, all big business around the world are pretty often poor payers. And so when we look at this space, and we are not looking to compete with government, we're looking to complement and add to the solutions that are being provided by everybody else. We're thinking about how we can introduce systems which support small business in factoring. If Joe, the small business plumber down the road, has a contract with Pick n Pay, that's pretty good money, even though Pick n Pay is paying at 90 days. Joe can't handle cash flow gap, but if he could get 80-90% of that money up front and somebody else take on that risk, that could be something spectacular because it enables business to be dynamic and vibrant. And as Matt's been talking about, it's the kind of space where we've got so much talent in South Africa. I mean, my fear for Matt is he's going to be overwhelmed with the number of applications for this opportunity. And as we do that, and as we build out those tools, I mean, we're talking to another company in the South Africa Future Trust stable to build exactly that tool. We're thinking about another one to build a mobile network which provides cheap data for people. We're busy trying to find all these building blocks so that when we bring them together, we can build this foundation on which small business can thrive. And if government can support us in that program, 100%, please join us. If government gets in the way, we'll find a way to work without their participation.
Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. I really appreciate the time. Jonathan Oppenheimer is the founder of the South African Future Trust. Matthew Marsden, the founder of Startup Club SA. And of course, the conversation, the competition is called the Big $1 Million Pitch. You're with The Money Show. It's 9 minutes to 7.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes, brought to you by Absa CIB, proud sponsor of the Bonds, Loans and ESG Africa 2025 conference.
7 minutes to 7 the time. Well, a moment ago, you heard Jonathan Oppenheimer using the example of a company which he said was beginning to have to lay off workers. This is according to the Fin24 report this morning, simply because government has been such a slow payer. As it happens, the name of that company is CSM Consulting Services, and its managing director, Dolph Moore, is on the line for you now. Dolph, good evening to you. What has happened? You've been doing a lot of work for government over the years. What's happened after you completed the work and it's time for them to pay you?
Stephen, good evening. Well, basically, they always used to. Well, government is slow payers. That's a fact. Since February last year, they became no payers. They stopped paying. They're looking for any excuse they can find not to pay for services done.
So this is February last year.
Since let's say March last year, since the new, just before the new, the year starts in April. So from then.
Okay. Is there any particular section of government that you deal with, or is it across government?
It's across national government departments. So it's basically National Public Works, provincial public works infrastructure, prisons, or correctional services, rather, health. Those are the departments that that's the biggest culprits.
I mean, I presume that the date on which they're supposed to pay you is in a contract that you will have signed with them. They just refuse to honor that.
Correct. In fact, I think in a lot of cases, the authorized representatives don't even know that a contract exists. Or if they know that it exists, they haven't read it, or they just choose to ignore it.
Sure. What happens when you take it up with them? Do they just ignore you?
Yes, they ignore us. They ghost you, and they ghost you and they ignore you until you. Since last year in October, I started taking it up with higher government departments. I escalated it. I eventually escalated it to 30 days payments at Treasury, which seems to be a site where once you start with it, they're compliance. Treasury is compliance. They seem to start taking an interest in it, but if you don't do that, they ignore you flat out.
Okay, so when this happens, I mean, I don't know if you speak to other people in your sector, but do you know if it's other people who are doing the same thing, if it's happening to other people too?
Absolutely. I've recently, in February, from last year, when we saw that, look, we're not going to get paid, we decided, what the hell, and if we don't get paid, we don't get paid, but at least let's take this public and let's see if we can make government accountable. So I've started putting it on LinkedIn. I'm getting results on a daily basis of people that says they're sitting in exactly the same predicament and they're not getting paid. A lot of the consultants, rightly so, is afraid to take on government. They've got a lot of work going on with government. They owed a lot. The more you owed, the less you want to take them on.
Sure.
So yes, that's not just me. That's the industry as a whole.
I mean, when you don't get this money, Dolph, and I mean, you have a right to the money, you've done the work, your company and the people your company employ have a right to the money, but your firm must be running into the ground because of this. I mean, you will have to let people go.
We've already done that. Last week, we retrenched 15% of the staff, not because we don't have work, because we don't know where the cash flow is going to come from, and it's going to be an ongoing thing going forward until we can normalize it either with not working for government or normalize it with government themselves.
How important is government work to your business? I mean, can you do without the work? And I know some of what they will ask you to do, you would only do for them. So if you have a specialty in that, you're quite dependent on it.
Yes, we are quite dependent on it. We've always worked for government. Government has got very large projects. So we've got some very important projects. We're working on national key point projects. We're working on military bases, nice projects for anybody that's in our field. That's projects you want to do. So moving from that away to either just private sector or something else is not as easy. It's not as easy as falling out of a tree. One has to plan for it. And yes, that is possibly where we are going if we cannot get government to follow their contracts. But it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight.
I mean, this does happen in our society. People do sometimes find a way to get hold directly of the minister concerned. I don't know if you've had any luck that route.
We've tried it. We've been ignored by the minister. Each and every email that I've written to him was ignored. I think possibly rightly so. There was something in the newspaper last year about him getting involved in something for payment for a service provider. So it's possibly because of that he doesn't get involved. But we are now directly in contact with Treasury themselves, with the Attorney General of South Africa, and then with some of the regulatory authorities for our disciplines.
Dolph, thank you very much indeed for that, and I appreciate you telling us your story. A lot of people running companies in this position might not want to tell their story. You can, of course, understand why. Dolph Moore is the Managing Director of CSM Consulting Services. It's an astonishing thing because I mean, when I was a member of the EWN news team, and particularly for smaller businesses, and Collins Jabane was a big part of it. I remember he was the Minister of Evaluation at the time, and there was a campaign in government to say you must pay within 30 days. And it is astonishing now that it is still a big issue. And I mean, I must be talking 10, 15 years ago that this was all supposed to happen. And there's no excuse. I mean, you heard what Jonathan Oppenheimer had to say about it. But it is just astonishing that this is still such a major problem. We'll get the outlook for citrus growers and their export markets in just a moment. Don't forget as well our big interview with Mike Teke, the CEO of Seriti Mines. He'll tell you his story in about half an hour. You're with The Money Show. Good evening, 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
5 minutes after 7. Good evening. Welcome to The Money Show. I'm Stephen Grootes. Good to have you along with us this evening. The Money Show with Stephen Grootes, brought to you by Absa CIB, proud sponsor of the Bonds, Loans and ESG Africa 2025 conference from the 25th to the 26th of March at the Cape Town International Convention Centre. Plenty coming up in the next little while. We'll get an update for you on the Citrus Growers Association, their predictions for the export market for this year. Obviously, somewhere in this conversation, you know who's going to pop his head into it. or should I say his hair into it, whether you want him to or not, just because the US President Donald Trump is making so many waves around the world at the moment. And then it's a fascinating issue, the issue of how economics or how societies develop. The book, Our Long Walk to Economic Freedom, you'll hear from Professor Johan Fourie, Professor of Economics at the University of Stellenbosch, just taking quite a long look, if I can call it that, a sort of deep-seated, very careful look at how economies develop and why it matters. And then don't forget as well, How I Make My Money, Mike Teke, the CEO at Seriti Mines. He'll tell you his story. Looking forward to that. Lots to ask him, actually, in all sorts of different ways around mining, around government, around everything. That'll be the person you'll hear from 7:30 this evening.
WhatsApp Stephen
On 072
702
1702.
Well, the Citrus Growers Association predicting they should be able to maintain exports of their produce within the sort of 5-year average this season. In other words, they'll keep their global market supplied roughly to the same amount that they usually have. Also fairly confident about the quality of the fruit they're producing. Paul Hardman is the Chief Operating Officer of the Citrus Growers Association of Southern Africa. Paul, good evening to you. Thanks for your time. You have various predictions, quite a detailed analysis of what to expect, but overall, you seem fairly confident of your fruit production this year. Paul Hardman, are you with us? We seem to have lost Paul Hardman somewhere in the matrix. Unfortunately, I don't know if he took the red pill. Maybe I did. But we'll get Paul Hardman back for you in just a moment, just to continue that conversation. And, of course, there's plenty to ask around fruit production, plenty to ask about export markets as well. And then, of course, the weather over the last year seems to have been kinder to many agricultural producers than it was in the past. And I think that's a big part of this as well. Do apologize for this. And, of course, we'll just try and sort of work out what we're saying. All right, just try and sort that out for you and get him on the line in just a moment. It's been fascinating just considering the story around how you would prefer your children to be educated, whether you're kind of in the face-to-face club, if you like, or if you're in this sort of other WhatsApp group, the virtual WhatsApp group. One of the great things about it, and we were talking to the CEO of Stadio Holdings, they've got around 87% of their learners now learning virtually. But I think for many people, growing up, going and studying was about far more than just the kind of education that involves, the actual learning. It was around trying to do something else. And I'm reminded of a quote from Robert Louis Stevenson, of all people, who wrote Treasure Island. I mean, a very old quote saying, in the sort of gendered language of the time, that the point of a university is to make a young man as unlike his father as possible. In other words, to make the child unlike the parent. And that is one of the points of an education, isn't it? So it is a bit more than just about learning.
702 Stephen is on X
At Stephen Grootes.
Right, Paul Hardman with us now, Chief Operating Officer of the Citrus Growers Association of Southern Africa. They put out their predictions. Paul, good evening. You have quite a detailed analysis of what to expect, but overall you seem fairly confident of your fruit production this year.
Good evening, Stephen, and good evening to your listeners. Yes, we've just been through a process where we collect information from all the growing regions and try to get a sense of what the upcoming season will look like. And yes, it does look positive. We're fairly confident that we've got a good crop and it's going to be available at the right times. So yeah, we're fairly confident for the year ahead.
As I understand it, there's probably been more rain in more places in the country this year compared to last year. Has that been a big factor?
Certainly the early part of the production cycle, so leading up to sort of midsummer, it was particularly dry, for example, in the north. So at one point that was a bit of a concern, but then some late rains have really helped the situation, and we're back on track. So, our overall picture is now looking like we'll be very similar levels to sort of a 5-year average. So we're on track to produce essentially what our markets will be looking for, sort of a balanced supply into those markets.
There's been a slight decrease in the number of lemons you'll be exporting. What led to that? Did anything happen in a particular region?
So our 4 largest growing regions are all down by about 5%. So we're sort of going to be exporting an estimated sort of just under 33 million cartons, so that's about 5% lower. And one of the main reasons for that is a slightly lower early sets. So lemons actually have 3 sets over the season, or 3 sort of crops, as it were, and the early sets is a little bit down. So that's what's contributing to a lower overall lemon picture for this year, and that actually might work in our favour in the sense that we also know that the lemon season is coming to an end a little bit earlier in our northern markets, so there'll be a nice switch over from the northern hemisphere supply to our southern hemisphere lemon supply as well.
Okay, I mean, you've got to get the timing of these things right. So that's on the production side. The demand side, Paul, is getting more and more interesting. We exported citrus products to China. I think our first lemons there, you'll have to correct me, was it 2 years ago? Is that going to become a big market? Is it becoming a bigger market already?
Yes, China is a very interesting market. We have actually been supplying that market for quite some time. About 3 years ago, there was a difference in the conditions under which we could send it, so that was in our favour. But obviously, China is a main producer themselves as well, and so again, that's where this other dynamic comes in. They're going to be out the market a little bit earlier, and by all accounts, they're looking like between 15 and 20% down. So that does create a bit more of an opportunity for us this year, which is different from last year. They actually had an oversupply and actually lingered in the markets for a lot longer. So that actually hurt us a little bit towards the end of the season. And it made it a little bit more difficult last year. But all the Asian markets are particularly important for us. As you know, we're exporting to about 90 different countries, and really each market is critical for us. Yeah.
It's fascinating. You're talking about the Southern African predictions because that's the organization you represent. Somewhere there's an official in China who's reading your predictions because of what it means for them, because you need to know what China's doing because it affects you. We do need to talk a little bit about the US. I think we will probably be kicked out of AGOA. That's my prediction, no one else's necessarily. Would that affect you? I mean, global trade does look like it's about to change quite fundamentally, and the sort of pattern and direction of it may be about to really change.
Yes, certainly. It's a lot more uncertain right now than it has been for a while. We do fortunately have access to quite a range of different markets, so that to some extent is sort of mitigating against the risk. But the uncertainty doesn't help. Obviously, the US is an important market for us, especially for our growers out of the Western Cape and the Northern Cape. And if we are not able to access that market under AGOA, it will have a serious impact. We estimate there's about 35,000 jobs. The value of that market is about R1 billion a year as well. So all that is actually threatened, with the uncertainty and just the added, essentially the cost of AGOA. And also ultimately, I mean, the consumers that we supply, people love eating South African citrus, and all these complications make it a little bit more difficult to put it into their hands, and at the right sort of price. Tariffs, etc., will add cost to that final product, and that's not really what we would like.
I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, but if we are removed from AGOA, that wouldn't stop you from exporting your citrus products to the US. It would just make them more expensive. Do you think at this stage, and it's hard to know, Paul, but I mean, if we were kicked out of AGOA but still had access to the US market, would we lose up to those 35,000 jobs as a direct result?
No. Well, it would certainly put us under pressure. There would be those added costs, and the reality is, that fruit that doesn't go to the US would have to be, put into some other market, which might put other markets under pressure. So it's certainly not helpful if AGOA is gone. And again, it's how we. The sort of longer term impacts are really important to understand as well. Because we were counter-seasonal to the US, we actually in sympathy and work very closely with American citrus producers as well, and sort of hand over from their season to ours. And if we aren't able to supply that market effectively, it actually makes it more difficult for them to keep the momentum up with consumers eating even their local citrus. So, and that over time, we are trying to do a bit more promotions and really extending the South African brand across the globe. And when you can't keep that momentum up, it does have long-term impacts on consumption.
Paul Hartman, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate it. Chief Operating Officer of the Citrus Growers Association of Southern Africa. It's a fascinating point that he makes, that for American citrus producers, it's actually better to have South African citrus products in the American market during the months that they're not supplying, just to keep the sort of appetite there. You know, in the US, as in most places now, I think you want to drink orange juice or have an orange or a lemon or whatever it is, or a lemon in some other drink. And you want to be able to do that year round. You get out of the taste of it because Americans aren't producing. Suddenly, the market isn't there for Americans. It's fascinating to consider.
The Money Show.
Business books.
Well, as you know, one of the biggest questions that we face is trying to work out how development happens, why some parts of the world look one way economically and some look the other way. And in fact, maybe even more importantly, is in the same country, why some parts of that country look one way and others look another way. One of the reasons why the book Why Nations Fails, why that book's authors won a Nobel Prize in economics, is because of precisely looking at this question. But there are many different ways of understanding this. And closer to home, the book recently published, Our Long Walk to Economic Freedom, is by Professor Johan Fourie. Johan Fourie is a professor of economics at the University of Stellenbosch. Johan, good evening. I really do appreciate the time and thank you for speaking to us. There are so many different understandings of what led to economic development, what has led us as human beings to where we are now. Are there particular sort of thoughts and theses that you prefer? Is there a particular understanding that you have that maybe overrides most of the other thoughts on this?
Yes, good evening, Stephen, and good evening, listeners. I mean, that's a massive question, and I'll summarize it in I guess, two lessons from the book. And it's, I guess, also lessons from the field of economic history, which is the field that I study. And that is that, of course, there are lots of explanations, potential explanations. You've mentioned James Robinson and his co-authors on Why Nations Fail, and they kind of make an institutional argument. I would say that economic history teaches us that innovation really matters, that our knowledge of nature, you might call that science, helps us to be productive, and we should use that knowledge to make ourselves more productive. So any policy we think about should advance our understanding of the world, and that advancement should be used in the service of society. But secondly, it's that, once we are more productive and we produce these bigger and larger surpluses, that we do not extract, that an elite does not extract that surplus for themselves. Because that can easily happen once there's innovation, that a small elite, either a political or, in olden times perhaps a religious elite, simply extracts those surpluses for themselves, and most humans do not benefit from them. And I think those, applying those two lessons to each policy we think about, when we talk about new policies today, do those lessons apply to each of those policies? I think that helps us move forward.
I was astonished about how your book sort of reconfirms that history is always with us. History really forms where we are. I mean, I was sort of astounded at the history of the slave trade and how long its impacts have lasted on Africa, and how, in fact, countries that are seen as less developed today are actually the countries that lost more people to slavery than other countries. I mean, that's astonishing.
Yes, it's certainly. I mean, we forget, partly because we have this, preference for news, immediate news, and the negativity bias that kind of forces us to think about the immediate. But sure, there's lots of historical shocks, typically negative shocks, that persist into the present. And a lot of the focus with the Atlantic slave trade specifically was on the Americas, and of course that's where many of the Africans went, largely actually to the Caribbean and to South America, even though it's North America, the USA, that seems to, where a lot of the attention is, the kind of cultural, focus of the world really is there. But a lot less have been asked about Africa. So the consequences of the slave trade for Africa, and what lots of scholars have shown, having investigated this quantitatively, is to kind of show the causal links between something that happened 200, 300, 400 years ago and how that still shapes African societies today. And the mechanism that's been identified is through trust. So communities where lots of enslaved people left the continent, they still see lower levels of trust today. And it's not only trust between, say, an individual and his or her government, but it's actually individuals and their families, or individuals and their neighbors. So there's something that's kind of deeply broken about those societies, and they are very strongly correlated, those kind of levels of trust, with the number of people that were enslaved 200, 300 years ago. Of course, it's a much richer history than just that one mechanism, but I think it's kind of a profound result in economics that you see this 203-year persistence of these effects.
I mean, it also has some implications perhaps for our inequality, our racialized inequality in South Africa. I mean, that you sort of see how different parts of our country seem to have developed more than others. And on top of that, there's kind of mining, which kind of created so many urban centers.
Yes, it's actually quite remarkable that, given this message that I've just said about the lessons that we've learned from trust and the slave trade and how it affects today, that we actually have pretty high levels of trust in South Africa. It's one of the countries with the highest levels of trust, which is pretty remarkable. And there might be many reasons for that. I think there's lots of research that should be done trying to explain exactly why that is. But it is, and of course, an important component of a market society is its level of trust. And so, I think that's a very positive sign. It's something that we can take forward. And of course, it's not to say that the past hasn't affected us in multiple dimensions, but it certainly is, a good indicator of going forward, is that there are, despite all of these tragic things that have happened in our past, and we can go back, 300 years, 200, 100 years, and quite recently, actually, and we still find that South Africans have relatively high levels of trust given our per capita income.
There are many different, and I mean, development is intensely political. I mean, so much of politics is about how to grow the economy, how to make ordinary people richer. I mean, it doesn't always look like that, but so much of it is in almost most countries. Is there any way that you can see that is a kind of roadmap? And I realize this is an intensely simplistic question in an unbelievably complex field. In a way, it's a slightly childish question, I suppose, but it's kind of an obvious one too, which is, what do we do next? And I mean, as a professor of economics, that's kind of a fundamental question, obviously. It's easy to look at some places, Japan, West Germany after the Second World War, and say, we'll do that. But we're not those societies.
Yeah, I think it's dangerous to kind of just copy blueprints from somewhere else. I think every country is quite unique. That's not to say that they aren't hard lessons. And I think those lessons that I mentioned at the start are kind of the ones that I would want to return to. So I think ultimately the lesson from history is the focus on innovation, on technology. So politics is theater. There's lots of politics, and South Africans love their politics. And we see that also reflected in the newspapers and online and, social media. And so there's, more than enough of that. But ultimately, it's these underlying technological forces. And when I say technology, it's not only the kind of thing, a mobile phone or whatever, or a new app. It's really kind of the systems around us. Might call them institutions, as Robinson did. That really change us. And those things move slowly. We don't necessarily see them. In the same week that the budget was, for example, wasn't confirmed, we found that Microsoft, there was this kind of news report of Microsoft inventing a quantum computer. Now, the quantum computer news never reached a mass market, mass audience, whereas everyone was talking about the budget. But yet, the budget will be forgotten in a couple of months' time, but the quantum computer might really radically change our lives in the decade ahead. And so, those are the kind of things that I mean. If we keep on investing in innovation, in science, either producing new science, new innovation, new technology here, or just copying what's being produced at the frontier elsewhere in the world, we should be doing well. We should be going upwards. And we can see that also with AI and the amazing opportunities that it creates.
I mean, presuming that the elites don't keep all the surpluses in AI, and I look at what's happening in the United States right now, for example, the sort of tech bros, and I wonder if their aim is to keep the surpluses.
I think that's a great point. I think that's something that we have to be very cautious of course. The one thing I would say is that there's lots of startup companies, manned by a couple of guys that seem to be producing models that are on the same level as some of these really giant mega corporations, the big seven. So it's to me the early evidence at least points to that there's not a lot of monopoly power or what you might call in the investment world a moat around these AI technologies, but But that might change, and it depends. It's really kind of an open question as to who will develop that kind of technology where there is some kind of moat that they can kind of earn monopoly profits. At the moment, I think I'm quite hopeful that even us here at the southern tip of Africa stand to gain immensely from these new technologies.
I think there's this expectation that humans and economies will continue to develop. In other words, that we would get richer. And we kind of know what happens in democracies when one generation's children are sort of less rich than the generation before them. You kind of get a Trump result, right? You get a kind of political response. And sometimes I think we forget, Venezuela is a good example. I think the Bolivar was their currency in the 1950s, was the strongest currency in the world pretty much. And look where it kind of is now. Things can go the other direction. Do we forget that sometimes? I mean, countries can go the other way. They can become less developed. And I wonder now, and I mean, this might be quite controversial, and I might be, in a minority when I suggest this, that in fact the United States might be about to go through something, but then, there are all the examples of innovation which would weaken my argument.
Yeah, I won't be able to predict the future. If I would, I would be rich. But I think you're right to say that there are examples in history where countries have reverted. So, famous in the book that I published, it's Argentina that I discussed. Argentina was one of the richest, if not the richest country at the start of the 20th century. And certainly relatively to other countries, they declined. But those are also the kind of rare exceptions, right? So that's the kind of key thing that I think we should keep in mind is that despite all of the racial discrimination and repression in South Africa, South Africans today are 6 times more affluent on average than they were at the beginning of the 20th century. So, regardless of world wars, of atomic bombs dropping on Japan, we see GDP growth increase, or GDP per capita at least, increasing quite considerably for most countries. So it's kind of the rare exceptions that they revert back. And I think it would be a very brave man to bet against the USA, even, despite the kind of political volatility at the moment. Given the point about innovation, I think it's certainly a country that is still leading the world and would likely lead the world in innovation, at least for the next couple of years, or if not decades.
I mean, global economies are changing I sort of almost wonder if they're changing more quickly now than at any other time in the past. I mean, and particularly AI, the role of technology, it does seem that things are moving more quickly than they did.
I think that's true. I think obviously every generation thinks of themselves as moving quite quickly. So you would read authors in the beginning of the 20th century would say that things are moving very, very rapidly. But of course, I think with AI we see things that used to kind of take a decade to develop. Now we see that months, right? So every couple of months there's some kind of new technology or innovation in the AI space. And it's it might be that this time is different, that our social lives are simply not able to adjust quite quickly enough to this new innovations, basically, at the rate of days or weeks. I don't know, right? But I think, again, we've seen in the past where humans have confronted rapid change and they've adjusted. So, again, I wouldn't bet against humanity for, again, finding ways to adjust quite quickly.
Professor Johan Fourie, Professor of Economics at the University of Stellenbosch. I really do appreciate the time. The book, Our Long Walk to Economic Freedom, by Professor Johan Fourie.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Mike Teke is next on The Money Show. He'll tell you about his journey through his really fascinating career. You're with The Money Show, just gone 7:30.
702 with Stephen Grootes.
Email him on stephen@702.co.za.
Well, from time to time, you will hear people in this space, in this moment during the week, who will be able to tell you a really incredible story about how they got to where they are now, from where they started to where they are. And in fact, many years ago, I had the privilege at a dinner of sitting next to our next guest. I haven't seen him since then, I don't think. His name is Mike Teke. He's the CEO at Seriti Mines and chair of the Masimong Group, and someone who, as you know, plays an important role in our economy, particularly in our mining economy, but also in other sectors as well. Mike, it's been several years. Good evening and thanks for joining us on The Money Show tonight.
Good evening, Stephen, and good to hear your voice. I've heard it over the radio, and the last time I saw you was in Limpopo. We were attending a South African Collieries Managers Association dinner.
Yes, it was. It was a long time ago now. Let's start at the beginning. I mean, as I understand it, you were growing up in Kagiso in the 1960s, the 1970s, the community that you were in, your family, I imagine, quite tough to survive. I think there were times when maybe, say, eggs would be a luxury for your family. What was that community? What was that time like for you and your family then?
Let me correct it. It's Guatemala in Springs.
My mistake. Sorry.
Guatemala, yes. I was raised in Guatemala near Springs, and I would say it was a struggle for the family. I was raised by my grandmother, and my grandmother raised myself and several other cousins, and had own children, and who happened to be my aunts and my uncles. And it was quite a big family in a very small house, a 4-roomed house. And the challenge at the time was poverty. The challenge was sharing things. The challenge was how we slept in that small house and making sure that we survive. But at the end of the day, my grandma made sure that we had to get an education, all of us. And I was one of those people that she paid more attention to.
And getting an education then, not everybody was able to do that. What kind of opportunities were you able to actually get? I mean, to go to finish high school then, not everybody did, unfortunately. What was that kind of education like?
Well, I went to a primary school in Guatemala called Fred Habedi. And up to finishing my primary school, I went to high school at Kenneth Masekela High School. Those were public schools. And today, it's funny, Stephen, when I talk to quite a number of people, I don't know why they think I went maybe to some private school. It was a public school in the township. It was tough. And it was those years when 1970s was primary school, like 80s was high school, and I was headed to university. And when I went to university, it was tougher because my grandmother had passed on, and I was staying with my sister and my other cousins. And we had to make means to make sure that they helped me when I passed matric to go to university. It was not easy. It was tough. You were comparing yourself with the other kids in school. Some of the kids were doing well. They came from better families, better in that they were having decent things as in fashion, clothing, and the like. And it was the resilience of making sure that I complete my matric studies and complete and go to university.
I mean, the university experience alone at the time, 1980s South Africa, a black person in a university is very political. There was a lot going on around you. And I would imagine also you really wanted to do well. Your community, your family had invested in you. You might have felt you had a duty to them. I mean, that must have been quite, for a young person, all of that going on at the same time.
Well, I had a responsibility, and I felt strong that I had to complete my university studies 1985 to 1989. And my sister, who was sort of persisting that I must complete my studies, I wanted to play football to some extent. I felt that I think I could make a good soccer player. I was capable. I had some talent there. And my sister resisted that. And she forced me and several people in the family that I must continue with my studies. And fortunately, in 1989, I completed. And I then started working in 1990. It was tough. It was political. And at that time, you must remember, Stephen, it was a period when there was the call for the release of President Nelson Mandela at the time, 1988, 1989, and we knew that there were those negotiations where the president then was a gentleman by the name of P.W. Botha, and we were uncertain about the future of the country. There was violence all over the place, and the country was almost headed towards a civil war, if I may put it that way. And then 1990, things happened. There was the unbanning of the political organization. There was the release of Nelson Mandela. And it was a great story for us. And life started for me in 1990. And it's 2025. I've never missed a day of work since 1990.
It's such an interesting comment that life started for me in 1990. I'm sure there are many people in South Africa who feel exactly the same way. And I mean, it must also have meant that your career could suddenly kind of get going? I mean, the timing was important, but suddenly you could do things. Where did you go after university? What was your first job?
After finishing my university, actually in 1984, when I finished matric 1983, I worked for a year in Springs at a company called Van Leer, and I was paid 76 Rand a week. I was raising money to go to university. And then when I finished, I was a teacher briefly at a school in Kwatema at high school. And then after that year, I joined Unilever, and that was the start of big things. I learned quick, had to learn fast. And after 2 years at Unilever left. They relocated to Durban, some of the operations, and I didn't move to Durban. I left and joined a German multinational, Bayer, which a lot of people don't know that Bayer had 2 mines. And that's where the mining bug, I think, started. And if it catches you, you become addicted to it for life.
I didn't know that Bayer had owned 2 mines in South Africa. So I mean, I came across a description of you going underground in the early 1990s. And I would imagine that our mines then were very different. The way people were treated were very different to the situation now. What was it about mining that captured you so strongly, and clearly has captured you since then? I mean, it's kept you since then.
Yeah, so Bayer had a chrome mine and a fluorspar mine. A chrome mine was in Rustenburg, and they had an underground mine. I started going there and learning about mining, but not that deeply, no pun intended. And I then left to join BHP Billiton. That was Samanco Manganese. And my experience in underground mining was, having learned at Bayer, I then started being attracted to coal mining from manganese within BHP Billiton. And the whole story started there. And since then, Stephen, I've fallen in love with going underground at the mines. Yes, I love open cast mining, but the whole mining story, for me, if a week ended with me not having gone underground and spend a day with the employees and talk to the employees, it's the spirit of teamwork. It's the spirit of the can-do attitude of what a miner can do underground. I mean, the environment is tough, 12-hour shifts, some it's 9 hours, of course, but the work that the employees commit themselves to and the deliverables that you get out of that have always amazed me. And I feel very strongly that those are the people I identify with, those are the people I feel very close to.
I mean, it's amazing the strength of feeling you have for it. Was there a particular moment when you realized you were going to spend the rest of your life doing this?
There was a time when I was attracted to other industries. Masimong Group Holdings is our family business, and we've invested in agriculture, we've invested in other industries. But if you ask me if there's one area where I wake up in the morning and I feel strongly that I must go to, it's a mine. I love mining. I'm not a mining engineer. I've learned a lot from mining engineers. They've taught me a lot of things. There is a man called Eddie Scholz. He used to be the CEO of Ingwe Collieries. That is, Ingwe Collieries was owned by BHP Billiton, and then Ingwe became Billiton Energy of South Africa, Billiton Energy Corporation of Coal of South Africa. Then it became South 32. Those are the mines that later in my years, we bought them and we own them today. I started my career there as an employee.
Must be amazing to sort of go through all of that. I mean, if we fast forward a little bit, and you know, you're kind of you're a mining CEO, you're a mining boss. I don't know if you accept that term or not. But I think we see headlines of you now because of the deals that you're involved in. And I'm fascinated about deals. I've never been involved in that myself. But, you know, when you spot an opportunity, how do you start the process? How do you approach? I mean, you must have learned a huge amount in coming up through the system, but also forming the system in some ways, but also in the creation of your own group. I mean, you must have really learned how to sort of approach a deal.
So let's start from 2005 to 2007, when I left formal employment. I spoke to my wife about leaving formal employment, and I told her that I wanted to go and start my own thing. That was the language I was using at the time. And I was exposed to the conversations in the boardroom at BHP Billiton when BHP Billiton was looking at selling their operations. They were looking at what they called at the time Black Economic Empowerment transactions. And I raised my hand in the boardroom. So that was the first story. I said to the bosses, I'm keen on being part of these transactions. I want to buy these assets. I didn't have the kind of money that was required at the time, Stephen, but I had to pound the pavements, you know. I have something I call the sleeping bag theory. I walk around with a sleeping bag, a proverbial sleeping bag, and I sleep next to your door. I'll make sure that I wait until you open the door. So I used to go to BHP Billiton and have those negotiations, and I was interested in a mine called Optimum Coal. I'm sure you know the story of Optimum. And I was one of the founding members of Optimum Coal. Then there was a second opportunity to buy a mine called Korenfontein Mines, and we bought those mines, and I became the CEO then, 2007 to 2012. When we listed the business, Glencore bought the business when it was listed, and I was the CEO. And when Glencore bought the business, I was sitting in my office, and one of the people who've worked with me for 20 years now, Doug Gain, he's the CFO now in Seriti, we had a conversation about the future. And I said, I still believe that coal has a great future, and I believe I'm a coal bull, and coal will remain here. I understand the environmental challenges that come with it. I understand the challenges that we deal with regarding coal mining. And that's when I started knocking at the doors at different mining companies, and we ultimately became successful in buying the assets belonging to Anglo. 1st of March 2018, we took over, and I was the CEO and Doug was the CFO. And 2021, we bought more assets from South 82 as they exited the coal mining space. So Seriti today consists of mines that came from Anglo-American and that came from South 82. How do I spot a transaction? When you read and hear comments from the investor community, especially in the listed space, people starting to tell you about companies that are keen to exit certain assets or certain asset classes, that's where I go to CEOs and knock at their doors and raise my hand and say, I'm interested. The second important thing is, I think the ability to invest time. I've invested time, and I'm a focused person. I don't look at other things beyond what is at the table at the time. And I'm not I won't say I'm a great negotiator, but I make sure that I get a good deal for the teams that I work with. And the founding shareholders of Seriti have believed in my capacity to run these operations, and we're sweating the operations. But 3 things worry me every day, Stephen. I want people to go back home safely, sleep with their families, come back the following day safely. The second one is to make sure that we sweat the assets in terms of production. This year, the company is looking very strong. And as we continue and see other opportunities, as in resources that we can develop and develop new mines, I'm very aggressive about it. We're going to develop those mines. But we are responsible miners. We understand ESG. We understand environmental challenges that come with fossil fuels. But we'll continue mining to make sure that our economy grows and South Africa can compete at the right level.
One of the entities you have to deal with is government, and anyone at your level would have to deal with government.
Yes.
You would have to deal with, sometimes, I suppose, I don't know, the minister directly. I mean, you might bump into each other at, there was an opening of one of your collieries in Mpumalanga the other day. I think the minister was there, things like that. Let me open it for you. That must be quite complex. I've always thought to, where ministers, and sometimes it's been a little difficult. I'm talking about, the sort of state capture era. But I mean, that must be quite complex. So you do have to deal with government, and government matters to you.
So, Stephen, remember I was the CEO of Optimum. Then I became the deputy president of the Chamber of Mines then. And I became president of the Chamber of Mines for 5 terms. And in that period, when you become the president of the Chamber of Mines, which became Minerals Council of South Africa, and then you become a CEO of your own company, they call us captains of industry, whatever name they use. You remain, I've always, the strength in my life is I'm optimistic about the future. I'm an optimist. And me being optimistic doesn't mean that I'm a reasonable person. I can be unreasonable, of course. But the reality of the matter is that you're right, dealing with the regulator can be complex because they are driving a certain agenda, an agenda that says we need the country to, one, have law and order, but at the same time, attract investors. who must see the country as progressive, as not hindering any investment, and a country that is pro-growth. If we can have that agenda, and that's what I've always striven. I'm optimistic, I'm pro-growth, I want the country to go. I have no time for politics, and thanks God I've never been part of a political party anywhere or anything like that. We make sure that we engage the ministers concerned. Right now in the mining industry, it's the Department of Minerals and Petroleum Resources, Minister Mantashe. We deal with the water, we deal with environment, we deal with land affairs, all those government departments, and treasury when it comes to tax and things like royalty taxes. Reality of the matter, Stephen, it's never simple. It's complex, but you make sure that you remain optimistic. Don't be an obstructionist. Make sure that you drive the agenda that is pro-growth for your business, pro-growth for the country to create jobs, pro-growth for us to compete in Africa.
We're speaking to Mike Teke tonight on The Money Show, the CEO at Seriti Mines, chair of the Masimong Group.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes, brought to you by Absa CIB, proud sponsor of the Bonds, Loans and ESG Africa 2025 conference.
Speaking to Mike Teke this evening, the CEO at Seriti Mines, chair of the Masimong Group. Mike, you actually wrote a book about leadership, and its title was "The Future of Leadership is Collegiality." There's a lot that's written about leadership, but you wanted to focus clearly on a very specific part of it.
I wanted to focus on the future. I'm fortunate that I've been CEO of private companies. I've been CEO of listed companies. I've sat on boards. I'm still chairman of different companies, private and public, and I've participated in the education sphere as the chairman of council at the University of Johannesburg, and I was president of the Minerals Council or Chamber of Mines. And I feel that I have seen leadership and I've experienced what leadership is all about. And I'm saying there are people who spend stressful times in their lives fighting in boardrooms, fighting in meetings, and people who are trained or informed or sort of mentored by other people to be aggressive, to fight hard, to cause challenges, to create stress in boardrooms and the like. And I've said to myself, how is it going to be if we become collegial? In other words, we understand that we have to deliver, we have to execute, but make sure when you communicate with those you lead, when you lead a group of people, make sure that you become collegial. I've experienced that people who become aggressive, you scream at people in the boardroom, it's well and good. There's some feel-good factor about it. But at the end of the day, you're left with the stress. You become so stressed. At times, some people will tell you that they've had chest pain. Some people, their blood pressure was increased. Some of the people, it impacted on their health. And that's when I decided that I think we need to start talking about being collegial. I'm not saying people must drop standard. I'm not saying people must be driving mediocrity. No. Meritocracy is number one. High performance standard. But make sure when we communicate what we want to achieve with those we lead, let's make sure that we are collegial. We are human beings. We don't fight about it. And that's what motivated me to write the book.
We've literally got a minute left. Are there still major things you want to do? Are there still things that are kind of on the Mike Teke list that you haven't ticked off yet?
Yes, Stephen, I am going to work like Charlie Munger. I'm going to work like Warren Buffett. I'm not going to retire. The reason I've designed my life the way I've designed it, I'm blessed that the good Lord has allowed me to design my life the way I've designed it. So I'm not going to retire. That's number one. Number two, I still want to create value. I believe South Africa has immense potential to be better than any. I think we can lead Africa. And I believe globally, we have a place as a country, and therefore I'm going to be at the center of that. But in business, I want to stay in business. I am going nowhere. I'm not going to retire at all. That's me, and that's my plan.
Mike, thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed the last half hour. I really appreciate it. So much more I wanted to ask. Mike Teke, I really do appreciate the time. The CEO at Seriti Mines and chair of the Masimong Group.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes, brought to you by Absa CIB, proud sponsor of the Bonds, Loans and ESG Africa 2025 conference.
Well, that's it for The Money Show. We, of course, back tomorrow. Plenty to come. Do stay listening.